So this is the second of our biographies of important musicians from the 20s and 30s and 40s, and it's the Big Daddy. It's Robert Johnson, and this is a man who is, I think, well, literally became a myth. And there's so many kind of stories circulating, and he became a figurehead of something very big, an influence on many rock and pop bands that came later, songs that are standards. But there's such a complex amount to his story. We're going to try and tell his story, we're going to try and pick through it, get to the bottom of it, and find out what's maybe fact and what's fiction. He was born on May the 8th in 1911, and he died on the 16th of August in 1938. So a very short life, but in that time he did a lot. He really is the kind of true archetypal kind of story of the tortured genius that is sort of doesn't do much in his lifetime, but after his death, his art is becomes huge. You know, world class, world changing. It's a great story. So, where do we start with Robert Johnson? Well, he had, by anybody's standards, a very strange kind of childhood and a very messed up childhood. So he was born to a lady, Julia Major Dodds, and as far as he was concerned, he was the 10th child in the family, with the father Charles Dodds. But in actual fact, what happened was Charles Dodds was quite a successful guy in rural Mississippi. He'd been run out by the Klan, and he left Julia back in rural Mississippi and set up in the city of Memphis. It looks like Julia had a man in her life who was 10 years younger, a man called Noah Johnson, and that is actually Robert's dad. So Robert is born and is brought up in this family with his brothers and sisters that aren't really his brothers and sisters. And from what I understand, he finds out later on that these actually aren't your brothers and sisters, and that guy is your dad, Charles Dodds, or now Charles Spencer, because he changed his name to hide from the Klan. He's not your real dad. So it's a very kind of messed up beginning. So then his mum vanishes off with a man 24 years her junior. Seems like she liked them young. And she went off, a guy called Will Willis, and they went to live in Arkansas. He was a sharecropper, he couldn't read or write. And eventually Robert Johnson goes to join the family, and from what I understand, there was a lot of you might call it abuse nowadays, but a lot of like issues in that house and the earlier house. So he kind of grows up an illegitimate child with all the kind of issues that come along with that. So people that know him say he was a prodigious musician. Like even at the age of 5, 6, 7, he could sing loads of songs, he could play instruments, he could get the other kids dancing. That's something that's well remembered. So there seems to be a certain amount of musical talent in him. As the kind of 1920s go on, he becomes... he finds out that Robert Spencer isn't his dad, so he changes his name to Robert Johnson. Now, he gets married in 1929, and I think that's the first time you see on an official document Robert Johnson, that's on his marriage certificate. He marries Virginia Travis, who's 16. And the idea is, I think that, again, from what people say, is that he had this very tumultuous upbringing, probably considered a bit of a runt of the family, unwanted anywhere he went. So he tried to settle down and do the right thing and farm and be a good man. And his wife, Virginia, she died in childbirth not long after. And from what people say, this made him... he really suffered badly with this. I think nowadays you might say he had post-traumatic stress disorder, and there was all kinds of issues relating to being close to people. So that's when he seems to very strongly develop this wandering thing, this desire to sort of not fit into a box, to be a square peg in a round hole. The famous story about Robert Johnson is that you'll hear people at Son House saying is that Son House would be out playing these kind of dances and these Saturday night dances in Mississippi, and he was very much a draw. And this kid, Robert Johnson, would turn up, the very young Robert Johnson. This is about the same time as he was getting married, so probably about 17, 16, well, through his teens, but 15, 16, 17. He'd turn up, and when the guys were off getting a drink or whatever, he'd pick up the guitars and play badly, and they'd be like, they'd have to get the guitars off him, and it was really annoying. So it's about this time after his wife died, I guess he must have just decided, right, that's it, I'm going for it. I want to do this music thing. So he vanished off and he found a guy called Ike Zimmerman who took him in, and basically for a year, Robert, from what I can tell, basically took guitar lessons and worked his, backside off. And it's one of those places where some of the myths grew up. There's lots of myths that grew up around Robert Johnson, that he sold his soul to the devil, and I've talked to people about this in pubs. They are sure that that's part of the Robert Johnson thing. Of course, it's supernatural nonsense, but apparently it's quoted that back in those days, shotgun shacks and all that stuff, if you were playing guitar, you'd be a nuisance to the neighbours, especially if you're learning. So one of the places to go was you go out into the fields or crossroads, or you go to a graveyard at night and you'd just play your guitar, because that was somewhere where you could make a lot of noise and not annoy people. So there's also Tommy Johnson was the one that claimed to have sold his soul to the devil, and I think in the 50s and 60s some of that folklore and myth grew up around Robert Johnson, this mythical character, and in his lifetime there was never any hint of that. People that knew him said there was none of that. He was actually quite a pleasant guy, actually, apparently. By and large, friendly, pleasant guy that could be moody at times and would often vanish. So that's his little side thing there. So he came back, and so the story goes, he came back and Son House was like, oh my goodness, Robert's here. He's not seen him for a year. And he picked up the guitar and played amazingly, and everybody got dancing, everybody had a good time. And apparently, Son House kind of, I guess, built up the story, but said, oh yeah, he sold his soul to the devil to get those skills. He'd just been off. If you play guitar for 10 hours a day for a year, you'd be a lot better, I'm sure. So he fathers a child out of wedlock around 1930. He marries in 1931, and his wife dies again. This is 1933, and again that really seems to be where he's already working now really as an itinerant musician, and he just throws himself headlong into doing stuff. So from 1932 to 38, he worked as a musician. That's what he did. And he worked with a lot of people, Johnny Shines and people like that. From what Johnny Shines talks about, sometimes they'd end up as far afield as Canada to play. They jump on trains, they go to Chicago, they go to New York, all of the Mississippi Delta. If there was a tobacco town bringing business, they'd go there. If there was a crop cotton was coming in at another time, they'd go there. And from what I can tell, they were very, very successful, and he was very good at entertaining. So what they would do is they'd turn up in a town, set up outside the barber shop or a restaurant, and he'd play for tips, and just that act would bring in people. They say, oh, come play my bar, come and do this, or do you want to come play at my house, we're having a fish fry, come along. And they were doing really, really kind of well, they were doing really well at that. And that's the kind of life that he kind of lived. He was going all over the place. There's a very good book, Escaping the Delta, which is one of the best books, I think, for not just Robert Johnson, but blues in general, and what it was to be a musician back then. What this book does really well, because it talks to people that knew him, is that they all kind of talk about the song My Blue Heaven was his favourite song, apparently. He loved Gene Autry, the country singer. He was really into Gene Autry and people like that. There's some great stories about how it's one of his travelling companions. I can't remember who it was now. Might have been Johnny Shines, or Robert Lockwood. But anyway, they said they were in a restaurant one day, and somebody put like the jukebox on, and they were just eating and talking. And then later that night, they went out to play, and Robert started playing this song that had been on the jukebox, and he said to it, the guy said to him, Robert, that song was on the jukebox earlier. He was like, oh yeah, I heard it, and he just did it. I mean, I can't. It takes me forever to learn lyrics, but apparently they just did it. So that is to me that's amazing. It's almost like savant-like to be able to remember the lyrics and just play the chords and do it. So I think it's fair to say, for people that knew him, that he had a record collection, and there's certain people that he really, really, really liked. Lonnie Johnson is one that was a big influence. Skip James, you hear in some of his falsetto stuff. Son House. So Lonnie Johnson has a song called Lifesaver Blues, which comes out in 1927, and about a dozen of Robert Johnson's songs you can kind of link back to this song. And the song is very kind of basic. It's in the wrong key to sing, but it's like, it's raining and pouring, the ship is out at sea. It has this kind of guitar figure. And then if you just take that guitar figure and it's 3220 and a bunch of other Robert Johnson songs. There's also some Sunhouse stuff. So I've got a guitar in open G here just to show you the Sunhouse thing. It's a resonator from the mid-30s at the time we're talking about. What you'll hear is in Walking Blues, this Sunhouse has the same song, basically with the same guitar part, which Robert Johnson must have just seen and learned. You'll get the idea. There were some examples of his kind of musical styles. Now, what did he do with those? He's going around the streets, he's playing, you know, white country songs in very white kind of towns, and he's playing religious material on Sundays around churches, and he's playing, you know, blues music and up-tempo jazz music, you know, kind of, you know, pop music, if you like, at parties and events. So he's doing whatever he has to do. How do we get a guy that basically writes songs that are artistically beautiful and perfect and influence a generation? Well, he obviously wanted to make something of himself, to prove himself, I feel, after his very weird kind of upbringing. So he, around 35, 36, he goes to see H.C. Spear, who is another one of these guys that has a furniture store, which is where record players and therefore records were sold. And he also then acted as a bit of a talent scout for the record labels and would put artists their way. Last week we did a Blind Boy Fuller video. We talked about J.B. Long. Well, H.C. Spear is the other main guy in the Mississippi kind of southern states area that brought a lot of these blues guys forward. So Spear likes Robert Johnson. He puts him forward to ARC, who are a record label. One of their subsidiaries is Vocalion. And he does his first recording session on the 23rd of November, 1936. And he goes to the Gunter Hotel in San Antonio, Texas. Room 414 is still there. You can stay in it. That hotel room was set up as a recording studio with a microphone. And he produces some songs. And they get released. They don't sell much, but he's professional. He comes up with good material. He's very good at what he does. So the record label bring him back, which is on the 16th of June? 19th of June, 1937. So in total, on those two sessions, he produces 29 songs plus 13 alternative takes, and that's it. Let's just pick 3 songs that I think embody Robert Johnson really well. So we'll put the links below, but the first one is Hellhounds On My Trail. I think this is where a lot of the myth builds up, because it's a very gothic kind of song in terms of the imagery, and it has this very dark descending guitar line, and it's very, in terms of like being a work of art, it's pretty perfect. But I imagine lots of largely white middle class people in the 50s and 60s and the folk boom in Britain and America and Europe must have heard that and projected this character, one man against the world, feeling bad, as lots of youths, generally it was youth, do. And a lot of these myths kind of grew up because it's so moving and so personal. It's a beautiful song, worth checking out. The next one is a great song. It's a standard. This is a song that Barack Obama sung in the White House with like people like the Rolling Stones at this blues kind of concert. So Robert Johnson would have never known that one of his songs was literally ended up, at the highest office in his country. Sweet Home Chicago, we've all heard it. And then the next song I've picked, I think there's a really nice story about this one. So this is the song Love in Vain, which is just a ridiculously beautiful blues song. But at the end of it, he sings, ooh, Willie May. And I always just think that was really beautiful. Willie May, what a beautiful name. There was a film made in the 1990s by John Hammond, who's a great blues guitar player and historian. He goes around all the Robert Johnson places, and he meets Willie Mae Powell, and he interviews her, and she talks about, well, me and Robert were going steady, and I had a thing for him, and she talks about his funny eye, and he'd just up and vanish and all this kind of stuff, and it's really nice. And at the end of the interview, he says, he wrote a song for you, and she she didn't know this, and he plays it, and you see it on the film. He plays a Love in Vain, which is about him having to go away and get on the train and leave his Willie Mae, and he's singing Willie Mae, and you hear her for the first time. This is in probably 50 odd years later, listening to her ex-boyfriend sing a song about her that she'd never heard before, and you can see she's really moved. And at the end of it, John Hammond says, like, and we left her with the tape, and you just think, wow. I mean, I just think that's one of the most sort of poignant and saddest, but most beautiful kind of things. Could you imagine a love letter finding you after 50 odd years? Ridiculous. So his death is one of those things that's surrounded in so much kind of conjecture. Again, there's so many researchers that argue the point, and there's so much information which is disparate. But we know he died on August 16th, 1938. He was 27, and he's now part of that 27 club of people like Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain and Janis Joplin and all these kind of rock and roll figures. The general consensus is he was poisoned by a jealous lover. He was playing at this there's a section of shops. It's just flat now. I've been, but there's a section of shops called Three Forks. It's where some roads came together. And he was playing this dance, and there was a lady, and he was being a bit flirtatious, and the husband sent some whiskey with some poison in it. There's a lot of conjecture, but one of the great researchers, Robert Johnson, McCormick, he apparently he found out who the guy was. People knew who'd done it in the area, and he actually approached him, and apparently the guy said, off the record, just when he was like going to his house, he said, I didn't mean for that boy to die, or something like that. He has 3 grave sites, if you can imagine that, and I did quite a lot of research. I actually visited what I believe is the one, which is in Little Mount Zion, near Greenwood, where he died. Apparently the grave digger and his wife both remembered digging it, and where his body was laid before he was buried by a tree. I've been there, and it's very eerie, beautiful as well. If you want to find out more, there's quite a few kind of sources. Escaping the Delta is amazing for so many reasons. I've got the other books actually hidden away, but so I don't have them to show you, but Up Jumped the Devil by Gail Dean Wardlow is amazing. Crossroads by Tom Graves is fantastic. And then I'm making this now in it's August 2020. The COVID's happening out there. Only a few weeks ago, the 3rd ever photograph of Robert Johnson was released, and that goes with the book Brother Robert by his kind of half sister, which is Annie Anderson. So there are at the moment only 3 photographs. There's the first earlier photograph where he's wearing the suit with his Gibson L1 guitar. Then there's the second one, which was taken in a dime store kind of photo booth, where he's playing. People have been able to tell from the dots here that it was a Kalamazoo guitar, not the F-hole one like I've got, but from about the same era, a round hole Kalamazoo like this. And then the third photograph that came out was taken on the same day in the same dime store. I'm led to believe that there are other photographs, and because of other issues, they're not being released because there's family problems and rights ownership problems. But apparently there are other photographs, which is pretty cool. So that's all good stuff to find out more of those books. The Search for Robert Johnson is great. There's quite a few films, stuff on YouTube. My friend Jonathan Nicholas, who's a great blues guitar player, and Robert Johnson, there's a video of his on YouTube, which if you search for Robert Johnson guitar, he has the exact same 2 guitars that Robert Johnson was known to play, and they even set up like an old recording session, and he plays the Robert Johnson songs note perfect, and they try and figure out which guitars he would have used, and it's pretty cool. You get right into the detail of the tone, and his Kalamazoo and his Gibson L1. So there we go. I've talked far too much. These videos are meant to be 10 minutes or under, but it's very interesting. The next one's going to be very short, I promise. So my name is Martin. The band is the Washboard Resonators, and we play 20s, 30s, kind of 40s, blues, jazz, swing, ragtime, hokum. We do our own music. Go to our website, and you can go to the shop and buy stuff. You can subscribe below. You can go to Instagram and Facebook and Spotify. Please do, because it costs you nothing, and it helps us get the music out there. So in the meantime, do look after yourself. I hope you find this interesting. If you want to have a little biography made of any of the musicians, please comment below, because this last week we've had loads of kind of people come up with ideas. So we want more ideas, because I've had a few people ask for Blind Blake. That might be coming along. Stop talking. Bye, everybody.